Shalom from Jerusalem, and Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah to our viewers around the world, and especially in the Holy Land and in the holy city of Jerusalem. This is Israel at War, an update on TV7 News Israel. I'm Amir Oren, sitting in for the traveling Jonathan Hessen, and with me are two distinguished retired brigadier generals, Mark Kiim of the U.S. Army. How are you, Mark?
I'm fine. How are you today?
Good. And Dr. Amnon Sofrin, lately of the Israel Defense Forces and Mossad. Hi, Amnon.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Now, this is day 444 of the war, which started on October the 7th, 2023. And this number obviously evokes the memory of the so-called student takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in early November of 1979, a crisis which was resolved only 444 days later when the hostages were released. And this happened only when President Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, as Ayatollah Khomeini didn't want to give the pleasure of the announcement to outgoing President Jimmy Carter. Amnon, in your view, as we are approaching not only Christmas and New Year's, but also the transition from President Biden to President Trump, is there any reality to the expectation that the ice will break and we will finally have a hostage deal in Gaza in which dozens, hopefully, of Israeli and other nationals, hostages, will come home?
Looking at the broader picture, when everybody looks at Mr. Trump getting into the White House on January 20th, the whole world is looking and expecting, and everybody has its own understanding and its own insights about the future diplomacy or future policy of President Trump. For example, he notified the Europeans that he is going to demand that the defense budget on each one of the NATO members will rise to be 5% from the GDP of each country. So far, it was set to be 2%, and now he's speaking about 5%. That means that he's going to make major changes in his policy. He's speaking about ending the wars. He doesn't want to initiate another war or new wars. He wants to end up this current war. That means Ukraine on one hand, and in Israel or in the Middle East on the second hand. Now, Hamas is negotiating up to the last moment, and Hamas is, of course, consisting on his policies. That means that Israel should leave at least what we call the Philadelphia corridor and the Netzarim corridor, and to allow people getting back into the northern part of Gaza at the first phase of this agreement. And Israel doesn't approve that so far. And there are some, some frequencies and some difficulties on the way. But I believe that when they see that time is running up and Mr. Trump is already getting into the White House, I believe that they will become softer because they understand that his policy will be totally different than the current president, Mr. Biden.
General Kiim, there is, of course, some intended ambiguity on President-elect Trump's side. He, when asked in an interview, he, of course, evaded the question, doesn't want to show his hand. But there is a contradiction here. If he doesn't want to get involved in new forever wars, what sort of deterrence does his statement have when, for instance, he threatens both Iran and Hamas, at least in one case saying that all hell will break loose?
Well, I think it's very simple. He doesn't want forever wars, and I think he's anticipating that a war on Iran and or operations against Hamas will not be forever wars, that they will be done swiftly, they will be done violently, and they'll be over before the weekend. Now, that may be a unreasonable expectation that it would happen fast, but I think the types of wars he is truly trying to avoid are the ones we had in Afghanistan and inside of Iraq, where he said many, many times, I would have fought them differently, and I would have taken the constraints off of my units so that they didn't have to drag along with handcuffs on their hands.
Now, Israel has enjoyed the success of the alliance here in the Middle East, especially under the aegis of CENTCOM, the Central Command, where you earlier served. And while it was US-led, there were other partners, Great Britain and some Middle Eastern countries, who either came to the assistance of Israel when Iran attacked or took action independently against the Houthis in Yemen. But this alliance could be taken out of joint if President Trump meddles in their domestic politics by insisting on what General Sofrin just mentioned, that they set aside 5% for defense, which means that they have less for domestic users. It will cause an upheaval, and the result might not be so beneficiary for this region, for Israel.
Well, first of all, I think we need to put his comments in context. For years and years during the Cold War, the percentage was 4%. And then gradually, as we were all taking the peace dividend after the war after the wall fell, then it slowly slipped its way down to 2%. And many countries, even at that point, would not meet that obligation. But the fact is that this holiday from history that we took between 1989 and now is over. We're back into a Cold War. It may not be cold, but it certainly is chilly. The very enemy that we had put 4% against during the Cold War years is back and is active. I think what he was really looking at more so is the replenishment of the stocks that have been consumed by Ukraine. And last, I would simply say, look, we know when he says 5, that's the opening position. If he can get them up to 3, possibly 3.5, I think he'd be satisfied and he'd take credit for it. There are a lot of people that believe that Trump inherently doesn't like NATO and he's going to pull out. No, quite the contrary. I think he wants to make NATO a success, and more importantly, his success. And if he can get them putting 3.5% of their gross domestic product into defense, so that they are not playing beggar thy neighbor policies and making the Americans do everything, I think he'll be more than happy with that.
This threat to withdraw from NATO might be only a bargaining tactic, but who knows how it will be perceived in places like Seoul or Taipei, where they might opt for some nuclear weapons of their own.
Well, first of all, they're both signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But second, look, this is not a new issue. We played this exact game in the first Trump administration. So there's not going to be a surprise in how this is expected in the case of Trump, nor in the way that the series of discussions are going to play out. Fundamentally, we've seen this show before. We're going to see a second act, but it's not going to be anything different from the first act.
General Sofrin, let's talk for a moment about the concept of deterrence vis-a-vis the Houthis in Yemen. Earlier today, the Israel Defense Forces announced that it has once again intercepted a drone, an unmanned aerial vehicle launched by the Houthis from Yemen, almost 2,000 kilometers away. It seems as if the quite massive Israeli strike last week did not get the intended result, at least not yet.
It's not only the Israeli Air Force attack. It's also the attack carried out by the American and the British Air Force. That the strike gave some strikes twice, at least, in the last 2 days. And the Houthis still go on launching missiles, sorry, not rockets, and launching UAVs, armed UAVs into Israel, and trying to hit. And unlucky us, they succeeded in the last few days to hit with once ballistic missiles that came from Iran, from Yemen, or 2 ballistic missiles, and 4 or 5 UAVs that were intercepted and didn't get to hit places inside Israel. And it seems that are not deterred. They're determined to go on attacking Israel and to try to attack every vessel that is moving along the Red Sea into the direction of Eilat. And they still insist on that. And the fact that they are far away, about more than 2,000 kilometers from here, and the fact that Israel cannot hit every day like they do on the Lebanese territory or in Gaza means that it could be carried out only once in a while. And therefore they feel safe and they say, okay, it's not a big hit. We can go on and attacking, and they now try in a way to fulfill the vacuum that was created because of the fact that there is a ceasefire in Lebanon and Hezbollah doesn't attack Israel anymore. And now they take the role of attacking Israel, and they claim that as long as the fighting in Gaza goes on, just like late Nasrallah said before, a few months before, as long as fighting in Gaza goes on, we will go on attacking Israel and assist our brothers in Gaza, our Palestinian brothers in Gaza.
But is it a real threat from the Israeli perspective, or mostly a distraction, a nuisance?
It's a nuisance, but if it's done on a daily basis, that means that first of all, Israel has to invest resources of its own, air force and air defense and so on, to try to block any attempt of the Houthis to attack Israel. On the other hand, it's whenever it falls down, and it happened unluckily twice, at least in the last days, it carries out, first of all, some damage, and second, a lot of what we call fear within the people that are surrounding it. Now, people take it seriously right now. The fact that they launch missiles from Yemen into Israel, everybody is running to its own shelter and staying there for 10 minutes, waiting until the sky are clear, and only then they get out. And you can't make it a habit of on a daily basis, because it's going to be something that is going to bother each one of us on a daily basis.
General Kiim, one of your domains of expertise is Iraq. And we have heard most recently about a sort of an agreement with the pro-Iranian militias and the Baghdad government regarding the cessation of attacks on either American or Israeli targets. Is it a viable agreement? And if it is, what does it mean regarding the expectations in Iran as the Trump administration is coming?
Well, first of all, I don't trust anything that the Iranian-backed Popular Mobilization Forces say. In fact, there were some discussions about the disarmament of the PMFs by Prime Minister Soudani, and making sure that the weapons are the monopoly of the federal government and not groups such as PMFs. And of course, today we've already seen some of those PMF groups rejecting that proposal. So I think we simply need to understand that the PMFs will not disarm. The best we can do at this point, and the best Soudani can do at this point, is to get some sort of tacit agreement that they'll stop the attacks into Israel. However, I simply still believe that I have a concern that as Iran is failing in Gaza, in Lebanon, and certainly now in Syria, they really have only 2 outposts remaining, one being Yemen and one being Iraq. And as I've said on American channels, I am concerned that the Iranians will try to make Iraq their final outpost in this axis of resistance until they can regroup. So I don't think things are going to get better in Iraq in that regard. I think they're only going to get worse. And I think the litmus test will be if the PMFs reject the proposal from Soudani and start attacking Israel again.
But while they have this aggressive foreign and national security policy, their own domestic energy market is collapsing. You can't really get power in Tehran or other cities. They are bracing for a very cold winter. How can they sustain this policy?
Well, in fact, I don't think they're going to sustain it. I think they will have to walk it back considerably. One of the advantages of the Trump administration coming in is that they are very, very hawkish on China. And the fact remains, most of the foreign currency that Iran gets is from China. So if you can blockade the Iranian oil shipments to China, I think you can get a twofer out of this. You can actually have a significant economic effect on China, but even more importantly, you'll have what could well be the crippling blow on the Iranian economy.
General Sofrin, 51 years ago, or 52 now, 51, 1973, you as a very young trooper, a rifleman in an infantry battalion, you fought up the Hermon Mount, where many of your superiors and brothers in arms were killed and or wounded. Now that Israel is back on top of the so-called Syrian Hermon and intends to stay there through the winter, but at the same time, a high level, reasonably high level, at least by State Department standards, mission has gone to Damascus in order to meet with HTS quote-unquote officials. Yesterday they were terrorists, now they are officials. But nevertheless, this is the new reality. What should Israel expect regarding the American policy vis-a-vis its presence in Syria?
First of all, I believe that each one of the European countries are now taking out HTS from the list of terror groups. And actually, they see and understand that Mr. now is calling himself Ahmad al-Shara and not al-Julani. He got back to his own original name. And now they say that he probably is the leader that somebody has to talk to. That means that almost this is the only address in Damascus that you can apply to. And therefore, the Europeans and the European Union and the American delegation and each one is coming to discuss with him and to see, first of all, who is whom, who is the guy, and what kind of business can we do with him to make sure that Syria doesn't really disintegrate and denying any chaos from this country. That's first. And that's understood because as long as you don't have another address, this is the only man that you know. He is the leader, and everybody has to apply to him. That's a. Second, regarding to Mount Hermon, it's not only that they got to the what we call the Syrian side of Mount Hermon, they even went higher to what we call the highest peak on the mountain, on the Hermon mountain ridge, which is 2,814 meters above sea. And I've been there as a cadet at the officers' course for 6 days when the whole area was bombed day and night without any break. And the people were cadets that served with me on the same officers' course. 2 of them were wounded, 1 of them was killed, another 2 of Golani Brigade soldiers were killed on the same night, and it was a horrible place. Now everything is calm. They got there without even shooting 1 shot or 1 bullet, not at the Syrian side of the Hermon and not at the highest peak. And I think that as long as we don't understand what is the future of Syria, we have to stay on this position that is controlling Damascus on one hand and the Lebanese arena on the other hand. and in addition to be in the same position that we held on what we call the demarcation line on the Golan Heights, on the Syrian side of the demarcation line, and to stay there as long as we don't understand that Syria is stabilized, that everything is calm, and only then we can go back and be on alert, because we may have some people trying to get into Israel or to try to hit Israel from the Syrian border, and we have to be aware of that, because there's no Syrian army anymore, and nobody can now control them except from this Mr. Ahmad Shara.
So this particular peak, the 2,814 meters high, is the high ground with line of sight, with the ability to see and listen and do whatever you intelligence types like to do, and control the area lest hostile forces approach. Mark, what's your expectation of Assistant Secretary Barbara Leaf's visit along with her colleagues? What can she hear from Ahmed Shara? We heard Secretary Blinken say that deeds, not words, will impact the U.S. foreign policy from now on. What sort of actions, what sort of deeds could the U.S. government expect from the new rulers of Damascus?
I suspect that Barbara came bearing gifts, primarily taking him off the $10 million rewards for justice list. But as I look at
on probation, right?
Fadan the other day,
on probation, conditionally.
Turkey, well, yeah, like the Houthis were on probation when they were taken off the terrorist list as well. But when I look at Fadan from Turkey talking to al-Shara, and al-Shara is there in his neatly clipped beard, his well-combed hair, and his British double-buckled monk shoes, I was shocked at this facade that's going on. I remain one of those that believes he may change his clothes, but he doesn't change his ideology. That notwithstanding, I think the important thing to understand is that the U.S. is in a very precarious position. My great suspicion and my great concern is that Barbara is trying to negotiate on behalf of the Kurds. The new Syrian government has been very, very explicit. There will be no federalism. So in other words, that would indicate that the Kurds that have been fighting alongside the Americans in northeast Syria will not have what they covet, which is at least a federal state, if not total independence. That, of course, puts us in trouble with our NATO ally, Turkey. So I think the important thing is we have to watch this three-way between Turkey, the United States, the Kurds, and how they interact vis-a-vis al-Shara and his well-shined shoes.
General Sofrin, another ethnic group which harbors or used to harbor some illusions or dreams of autonomy is the Druze. And of course, they have their own enclave or their own redoubt in Sweda, not too far from both the Israeli and the Jordanian borders. And of course, decades ago, there were contacts with them. In 1967, there were voices in Israel, influential voices regarding a link-up with the Druze and Jebel Druze in Sweda and helping them split from Syria and create their own entity. Is it viable again?
Depends on the future of the integrity of Syria. That means that it's easy to imagine that Syria will be divided into three ethnic groups. The first one will be the Kurds in the northeast part of Syria. The majority of Sunnis from that area until, or let's say, up to Sweda. And the area of Sweda will be an enclave of Druze. But I'm not sure that this is going to be the future of this country, because Mr. Ahmad Shara now said that he wants to join forces. He wants everybody to be integrated. He wants to disarm all what we call the armed groups, including, of course, the Druze and the Palestinians in the refugee camps, mainly in Yarmouk, refugee camp, which is very close to Damascus, and so on. And I'm not sure this is going to be very smooth, and each one will insist that he will keep his own weapon systems. So it will take a long time until there is a stability in this country. Now, I believe that the fact that we are deployed in the southern part of the Golan Heights, east of what we call the Rokat River, and very close relatively to the Druze in Sweden, that there are some ongoing links between Israel and between the Druze to negotiate. And bear in mind that we have another enclave of Druze in Hadar, which is very close to Majid Shams on the other side of the hill. And there are what we call relationship or family relations between those two villages, and they engage with each other almost on a daily basis, shouting on each other from the two sides of the fence. And that means that we have, if the Druze would like to have their own kind of autonomy, they will have to try to figure out how they disengage or engage with the people from Hadar and create something together. I don't see it is happening because the current regime or the current ruler of Syria will not allow that. And therefore, I believe that the only enclave that will be in some kind of relation with Israel would be this one in the area of Jabal Druze or in the area of Sweda, as you called it. And I believe that this is an ongoing relations between two sides, and maybe they will try to get some assistance from Israel and to be enforced by Israelis to face attacks if and when they are coming from other sides.
Thank you both. Not only did we run out of minutes and seconds, we almost ran out of the entire year. But for the time being, Brigadier General retired Mark Kimmit, Brigadier General Dr. Amnon Sofrin, thank you both. This has been Israel at War, an update from TV7 Israel News in Jerusalem. For the time being, Shalom from Jerusalem, and again, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.